Hello and welcome to Edie Extra, the new home for all of Edie's special audio features, building on our long-running Sustainability Uncovered podcast with one-on-one interviews, site visits, analysis, panels and more.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Edie Extra. You're listening to the voice of Edie senior reporter Sidhi Mittal. For this episode, I am back in Hammersmith, London, and joining me today is a very special guest, Formula E's Chief Executive Officer, Jeff Dodds. Hi Jeff, how are you?
Hi Sidhi, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good as well.
Why back in Hammersmith? Do you live in Hammersmith or have you worked here before?
I used to live in Hammersmith up until last August, right next to Brian's Court, so yeah, it's just been a bit nostalgic.
The gravitational pull of Hammersmith has drawn you back in, I love it.
Yeah, and I've heard you've been based around Hammersmith for work
A long
as well.
time,
Yeah.
so I used to be at Virgin Media and they're no longer here, they're in Paddington now, but they used to be up the road. So I think I've been driving to Hammersmith for 15 years or something, so yeah, I know every inch of Hammersmith.
Wow. Yeah, which brings me to my first question as well. You joined Formula E exactly the same year as I joined Edie.
Okay.
And I know from my experience, it's been just such a whirlwind of experience and it's gone so fast. How has it been for you? How have the past...
Yeah, 3 years for me.
3
So
years.
I think I joined in the May of 3 years ago. I joined halfway through season 9 in Formula E terms. We're just about to close out season 12, and I think I've clocked up between 50 and 55 races now. So it's a whirlwind. If I think about the amount of change in this business, but also more broadly in the world over that 3 years, it's incredible. The pace of change is pretty incredible. So yeah, well, I joined, I think as a business we had 300 million fans around the world when I joined. We now have nearly 450 million fans around the world. We're just on the verge of launching a new race car, which is a massive jump in technology. So yeah, it's been incredible. I think I had hair and a darker beard when I joined.
And you look fantastic. And yeah, Formula E is fast in all senses. And it's grown immensely as well year on year, so 13% year on year increase last year. What do you think has been the biggest driver of that growth?
So I would say that some things that we benefit from the tailwind of, so we're not in control of it. So, in reality, if you go back to the very start of Formula E, the year it was launched, I think there were 300,000 electric vehicles sold globally that year. So not very many. This year, there will likely be around 20 million electric vehicles sold. So the one thing that's changed and helped us grow is that we're riding the tailwind of electrification. That's one thing. And maybe we'll talk later about some of the challenges with the transition to electric. But in reality, it still continues to grow pretty significantly year on year. So that would be one thing. The second thing is motorsport is becoming ever popular. So thanks to our cousins at, I think, Formula One, but also NASCAR and IndyCar and MotoGP and ourselves, you have a really exciting period for motorsport. So we're part of that, but we're also benefiting from people getting excited about sports and sports rights and motorsport. And then I think we're just, we have good investors in Liberty Global, who are our largest investor. We have great people here, and I think the discipline of just executing the plan really well year after year. So the combination of some of the trends in society that we're part of but not in control of, and the stuff we're in control of, we're doing really well. So it's been an incredible period for growth.
I really want to understand the audience of Formula E and how you see them as well. So is it based on geography, age, sustainability interests, or are you catering to traditional motorsport fandom? Like, which part of this audience has surprised you the most in terms of growth?
So look, inevitably, when you talk about 430 odd million fans, it's not one audience type. There's lots and lots of different ones. So if you look at the geography of our audience, very strong in Europe, growing in North America pretty significantly, very strong in Latin America, but we have over 100 million fans in China, to give you an example. So we have very much a geographic footprint, but if you look at markets where EV development is growing rapidly, our audience is also growing really rapidly. Second thing that might surprise some of your listeners will be that our audience is largely 50-50 male-female. So sport traditionally is a male-dominated fan base. Motorsport historically has been pretty heavily dominated by slightly older white men. We have a much more diverse audience, and as I say, 50-50 male-female, and younger. So our typical age is kind of between 40 and 45. Motorsport would skew older than that, normally between 50 and 60. So younger, with gender parity, and more interested in innovation, technology and sustainability, which I guess is not a massive surprise given what we do and the products we have. And people often ask me if my job is to go and to convert Formula One fans, for example, into Formula E fans. And, with a smile on my face, the answer to that is, well, I'd love Formula One fans to become Formula E fans because they love racing and they love speed and they love close combat on-track activity. But in reality, it's probably easier for me to acquire non-motorsport fans who are new to motorsport because our races are less than an hour. So they're not an hour and a half, 2 hours long. We have less history and less legacy. So you can come into our sport as a newbie and quite quickly understand it and feel like you're part of the community. You don't have to have learnt about the last 75 years of the sport to feel like you can be part of it. So most of our fan base growth is coming from new to motorsport.
Wow, that's really interesting. Everything that's happening with Formula One as well, there's been more convergence with the new engine regulations as well. I know you've long described yourself as a Formula One fan, so I'm curious about your perspective on the current debate on F1's 2026 regulations. So we have seen criticism from drivers like Max Verstappen, who has suggested that the changes to sports staking feels like Formula E on steroids. Do you see this pushback as like a communication problem, a technology problem, or like simply resistance to change?
I think it's probably all of the above. But so look, I'll give you a personal view. And I worked around Formula One for quite some time when I worked with Honda previously. And I'm a fan of the sport. So I know a lot of the drivers, I know a lot of the team principals. I'm in and around that sport. So the first thing I would say is there's always a resistance to change. Always, because I think, particularly in a sport that's been very successful for 76 years, which it has, there's a familiarity with that sport. So anything you try to introduce which is slightly different means having to recalibrate yourself as a fan to understand it. It changes the status quo on the track, in the paddock, it changes the order in the championship race, and therefore it requires people to modify their understanding of the sport. So I think it's natural for people to be reticent about it. I think what you're hearing from different audiences, though, is that the drivers are saying, and I understand this, it feels quite unnatural to drive. And I would say that's not and shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, because driving a pure combustion engine car, that's a technology that's 130 years old. It's largely been the heartland of Formula One for 70 odd years, is quite simple to understand in that it's foot flat to the floor, take the car as fast as you can. You're rewarded for the latest braking and the fastest accelerating and perhaps the most aggressive approach and strategy on the track. It's not easy to do, but it's simple to understand what's the difference between success and failure in Formula One. All electric is also quite simple to understand. So in our race, very difficult to execute, but in our racing, it's all electric, which means blisteringly fast acceleration, much faster than Formula One, but it's highly strategic. You can't just put your foot to the floor, you run out of battery. So roughly half of the energy you need to finish the race, you get during the race by regenerating the battery. So it's very strategic, but it's a regeneration sport. So it's different to Formula One. When you move to a hybrid of those two things, it becomes much more complicated because it's not simply foot to the floor, go as fast as you can. They have to harvest energy now in a hybrid version. And it's not simply about strategy and regeneration. And it's quite complex to understand. And you have cars on track doing different speeds and drivers having to understand how to drive differently. So when Max says it's like Formula E on steroids, I completely get that comment because it's unnatural. It's not a natural sport. It's bringing together and fusing two technologies and trying to race in that environment. I think they've made some good changes because they've listened to the drivers and they've modified the changes. And I think now, of course, they're talking about a move back to combustion for 2030, 2031. And I think if that happens, on the one hand, again, you're back to a simpler to understand sport. And it means very clearly we race electric, they race combustion. Very simple to understand. On the other hand, by 2030, 2031, maybe there's 40 to 45 million electric vehicles sold, double the number we have today. So they're moving towards a historic technology, a legacy technology, at a time where the market and the world has tipped and shifted into electric road mobility, which I think adds another layer of complication for them. So I don't envy the position for Formula One. They're a great sport, they're a great entertainment platform, they've been very successful, but this is a complex period for them.
I was wondering if you had any lessons for other parts of motorsport championships as well, how to decarbonize without losing the elements that fans and drivers love about traditional racing?
So look, we have a lovely benefit that we're 12 years old, and when we started this company, we started it not just to create a great motorsport, but also to accelerate the energy transition, to play a role in helping people move from combustion cars to electric vehicles. And the third was to showcase to other events and sports that you can deliver a sport in a more sustainable way. But we're 12 years old, and this has been part of our DNA from the day we founded. When you're 70 years old or 100 years old, and you're trying to reverse engineer your product to become more sustainable, it's very different to starting out with that in mind. But that doesn't mean you can't make changes. And actually, I have to say, most sports around the world I look at are making changes at varying different degrees of pace. But if you're used to having 25 races a year all over the world, and every other week you're freighting a lot of equipment, a lot of cars, you're having to do things in a certain way, trying to change the way you run a business when the fans understand it and the partners understand it and the media broadcasters understand it and the business is geared around it is much more complex. I mean, my advice would simply be to say that you have to systematically go into every part of your business, rely on every one of your leaders to look at their own area of accountability and to ask themselves the question, which is, can we do this differently without compromising the product? And I think, I'm going to be a bit philosophical, I think one of the great challenges of sustainability is that when people hear that term, what they really hear is compromise. So they hear someone say, let's be more sustainable, and what they hear is, let's compromise the product. And I'm a big believer in, not only should it not compromise the product, but done properly, it should enhance the product. So how do you switch the mentality in the business to say, looking to reduce your carbon impact, to invest into the societies in which we're operating? How do we make that a positive for our product and our offering for fans? Not go into that thinking, but if we reduce the carbon footprint, surely the product won't be as good. Because I think that mentality is never going to work for people who are trying to make the shift.
I wanted to gauge your thoughts on what's happening in the policy space a bit as well. We're seeing more pushback from more legacy automakers on the transition and the targets that some ambitious governments have set in Europe, in the UK. And you've already talked about like how the electrification part of the industry has helped the sport grow as well. But I was wondering if you see like a give back opportunity that Formula E could have in this space right now when automakers are arguing that the right technology doesn't exist. How do you see that working?
So look, I guess I could spend 2 hours answering that question because I have such a lot of thoughts about it, but I'll try and structure a response. So first of all, policy. So we're sitting doing this podcast in the UK. We could be in other countries. Policies are different by country. But let's take the UK for an example. So the UK had a policy around a shift to electric vehicle by 2030. They shifted it to 2035 in the last couple of years. A lack of consistency is very challenging for businesses to plan for. So when you're an auto manufacturer, the timelines you're operating on, the cycle of developing cars and then producing cars and the lifetime of that car before it's rolled out and a new one replaces it, they're over decades. So when governments shift policy, it's very discombobulating as a manufacturer in auto sector because you've geared your strategy around a policy date. Therefore, you put in place a strategy and invest in that strategy to deliver on the policy date. So when it changes, it creates a lot of uncertainty. So the first thing I would say on policy is, once governments put policies in place, they need to provide consistency, and that means sticking to it, particularly in industries that have very long lead times. So that would be the first thing. So consistency, I think, is the most important thing. As a very early adopter of electric vehicles, or hybrid, then plug-in electric, then full electric, and I've been driving electric vehicles pretty much since the beginning. The technology development over the last 10 years has been incredible. So I hear a lot of people talk about things like, but the infrastructure is not very good. In reality, I can count on one hand the number of times I've charged a vehicle off premises outside of my home in the last 10 years. So I think there's the kind of myth busting that goes with this. Most new electric vehicles being built and sold today have a range in excess of 300 miles or 500 kilometers. The need for charging those off premises is very, very small for most people, yet there's this myth around, we can't move to those vehicles because there's not enough chargers on the street, or there's, the range won't be good enough for me. I think the role that Formula E play is there are 3 myths that I think have prevented people from making the transition to either a plug-in hybrid vehicle or to full electric vehicle. One is this sense of, but the cars are going to look ugly. So when you look at our racing cars and you look at the new generation 4 car, I defy anybody to look at that car and say that's ugly, right? Because it's the most beautiful racing car. And if you look at, I'm going to resist the urge to get dragged into a Ferrari conversation here, but if you think about some of the most beautiful racing cars and sports cars produced, some of them are all electric cars. So they're not going to look very good. The second thing is they take forever to charge. Well, no, they don't. Most of these have now a range where you're charging them from 0 to 80% or from 20% to 80% in very, very short periods of time, and charging technology is getting better and better and better. So they don't take forever to charge. And then, the range isn't good enough for me. Well, we can race for an hour flat out of speeds up to 200 miles an hour on a racetrack in our cars on a battery charge. We have fast charging pit boost that puts 10% of the battery life back in there in 30 seconds of charging. So the role that we play is trying to take those myths and bust them on a racing track by showing people the cars can look great, they go really fast, they charge really quickly, and there's enough range in these cars to produce a racing series. So part of our role is for education. The other part of our role is the manufacturers in our championship are using the racetrack. They're part of our champion to develop next generation technology. So whether that's improved efficiency, better software, better powertrain development, improved battery development, our racetrack is a laboratory for different manufacturers to improve the technology that you're going to see on the roads in the next 5 to 10 years. And you have to remember, I said earlier, combustion technology is 130 years old. Now, if you go back and look, you'll find people tinkering around with electric vehicles and battery vehicles back in the very early days as well. But in reality, the technology has only been mass produced in the last 15 years. So you're comparing a 15-year-old technology to a 130-year-old technology. And if you think how far electric vehicle technology has come in 15 years, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. A lot has changed in terms of air routes and logistics in the past couple of months. So Formula E successfully raced in Jeddah, but we have seen some motorsport and other sport championships also cancelling some planned races in the Middle East area because of the war. So as we're seeing this happen, and then more pressure being on championships and just sport organizations in general to reduce their air travel, their logistical emissions, how much more prominent has geopolitical and logistical risk become in your calendar compared to, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah. Right now, we're having this conversation, there's a global conflict. Let's be clear, there's many global conflicts underway currently, and there's a very prominent one in the Middle East. For us particularly, we had our race in Jeddah in February of this year, before the conflict started. So we were very fortunate that we'd gone through the Middle East. So from a disruption in this specific year, it hasn't directly influenced our racing calendar, unlike Formula One, who cancelled 2 races because of the conflict. On the other hand, it has other impacts, downstream impacts. So oil prices, availability of fuels, we're freighting cars around the world, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second, but we freight cars around the world, so the cost of freight for us, and having to route that freight slightly differently to avoid difficult conflict areas. So it definitely has a challenge. Also, if you think about Saudi Arabia, part of the Middle East, we race in Saudi Arabia, but we also have the PIF are a small minority investor in us. We also have sponsors who come from that region. Mm-hmm. So they're being impacted by the conflict, and therefore that has a downstream impact on us. So it is complicated. On the other hand, strangely, it's having some positive impacts. And I hesitate to use the word positive, but if you think about people worrying about cost of fuel and people worrying about availability of fuel has meant there's been a big spike in the shift to electric vehicles. So, there are some downstream impacts that have a positive impact on our business. Of course, we don't like the fact that it's that event that's leading to that positive impact, but it has impacts on both sides of the ledger. Of course, our priority for us is to ensure the safety of our own staff, of our teams, of our drivers, of our manufacturer partners, of our sponsors. So we have to, that's always the top priority for us. And it isn't just the Middle East region that has its challenges at the moment. There are other parts of the world, and we're a global racing series. So we have to take that into account really seriously every year.
Something exciting, Formula E achieved its B Corp certification earlier this year. So I know your VP of Sustainability, Julia, recently spoke to our editor, Sarah, about the process. And she mentioned you came came in and it was just part of your strategy or vision, why was it so important that Formula E certifies to B Corp for you?
Yeah. So I guess linked a little bit to scope 1, 2 and 3, and you just talked a bit about scope 3. So when I arrived, there's no question this business is kind of world leading in its approach to sustainability. So if you think about it, we have an ambition to reduce scope 1 and 2 by 50%, scope 3 by 27.5%. We were the first sport in the world to sign up for science-based targets to reduce on a balance of 45% over a 10-year period out to 2030. Number one rated global sport for sustainability. I think at the time, number one, I say at the time, not like we've dropped, but I don't know if we measure it still in the same way, but number one sport for ESG in the world. We had all this this kind of back catalogue of incredible recognition for the work we were doing on sustainability. ISO certifications like you wouldn't believe, but in reality, there are very few kind of consumer recognised or publicly recognised brands around sustainability, and one of them, and probably the most recognised, is the B Corp certification. Very, very hard to get. Once you get it, you take it lightly, but you can't take it lightly because you get it and then you've got to keep it, which means you have to continually show improvement against those metrics. So when I arrived, it was really to say, all this incredible work we're doing, this is great, but how do we also find a sustainability brand that is more publicly recognised by fans, by consumers, that comes with a community of other like-minded businesses that we can be part of? And that was one of the first conversations I had with Julia when I arrived. And Julia took on the challenge of I don't know if she knew it was quite such a big challenge when she took it on, but she took on the challenge of going through the process. And actually it became 2 years of her life, because, on one hand, meeting the criteria is one thing, but also from B Corp's perspective, we're the first and only kind of big sport, championship sport that's part of the B Corp community. So they weren't really sure. Not only are we a sport, we're a motorsport. So we're racing cars around the world and we're freighting cars around the world. And I think it took them a while to understand how we could be part of their community, and it took us a while to go through the audit process and demonstrate that we were meeting the criteria to be part of their community, and it took 2 years. But having achieved it, I think the sense of achievement for us within the business is incredible. The reaction we had from our partners, from our teams, from our manufacturers, from our investors has been incredible. And we legitimately feel part of a B Corp family now. We talk to other B Corp businesses, we do work together with them, we're looking into that community for supply of products and services for us. It's been a really rewarding process.
Since becoming certified, has it changed the way you make decisions on a daily basis?
I think it's sharpened the focus around those decisions. So from really small decisions to really big ones. So good example would be, let me do small first. So whenever you come to our hospitality formula, if you come into our hospitality suite, we like to give small gifts to people to recognise and thank them for being part of our community. Well, now those gift packages we will look to supply through the B Corp community. So it'll be a gift package that comes from within the B Corp community. So that's a small idea. A big idea will be, we went from 3 aeroplanes to 2 aeroplanes. Our single biggest driver of carbon emissions is freight. Around 50% of our total emissions come from freighting our cars and our equipment around the world. And when we went from 3 aeroplanes to 2 aeroplanes, we reduced that by 28%. So it's a massive, massive drop. Being part of B Corp, you're signing up to constant and never-ending improvement.
Thank you, Jeff. No, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time speaking to you. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have.
That's great. Nice to see you.
Episode.
I'll see you back when you come back for a trip down memory lane in Hammersmith again. I'll see you then. You can come and we can catch up on things.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds great. And I wish you good luck with the next few races.
Thank you.
For now, this is a goodbye from Jeff.
Goodbye.
And this is a goodbye from me. Goodbye.